Now, I want to share something with you. It's kind of a footnote in a way from yesterday. And see, remember I just said to you, there's no ego here. It's a goal, it's a mission, if you will. And after service, I happen to be talking with one of the staff people, and they only emphasized more, if you will, what point I had been driving home by something, an observation, which to me was apparent, but I think that putting it out there and saying it makes it even more clear. In the passage that we were in Matthew 25, starting at verse 35, where Jesus is saying, when I was hungry, you gave me to eat, thirsty, you gave me to drink, and so forth. And it says, then shall the righteous answer him, saying, Lord, when did we see you hungry and fed thee? So right away there, that tells you the fact that they're saying, well, when did we see you hungry, says that they weren't aware, they weren't doing what they did, like, oh, let's go out and clothe the poor or feed the poor. They weren't even thinking about it. It wasn't like, this is my plan of action for salvation, or this is the Jerusalem mission is going out to do charitable deeds for the poor. The very fact that it says, then shall the righteous answer and say, when did we see you? Even though Jesus says, when I was hungry, you fed me. When I was thirsty, you gave me to drink. And he's speaking to those righteous. And they're saying, when did we do this? Means there was no preconceived, like, tomorrow I'm going to go out and I'm going to find somebody to put my good deeds on and do good works. Does that make sense? Which, again, tells you why this can't be a premeditated. The focus is always wrong on this passage. It's always this premeditated, well, Jesus said this, so I guess I got to go out and I got to do this. That's not what the passage is implying. And just the fact that they asked when, means that they didn't have, there was no motivation. In fact, they didn't even think anything of it. That's part of, put you this way, it's part of their faith DNA. That is, it's the most difficult thing to explain. There is a book, I can't think of the exact title, but it deals with the theology of Luther. And whoever did this book did it brilliantly, because one of the subjects that they address in this book has much to do with Luther's interpretation of works that are a product of the Holy Spirit, and therefore they are without preconception, there's nothing that's really premeditated in it, only that the focus is essentially on Christ. So when I talk about something and I say this will happen, it's an inevitable part of what God does when he begins to change us. It doesn't mean that we should be thinking, well, I need to go out and do this tomorrow. This is not what that passage is saying. But will change happen? Will change come? Absolutely. And there's actually too many examples in the Bible to show of change that has occurred in individuals without them attempting to change. And I mention him often because he's one of my favorite characters in the New Testament in terms of like a personality, is Zacchaeus. Just the fact that this man wanted to climb up in a tree or the highest place so he could get a glimpse at Jesus tells you that he was interested. And his response afterwards tells you that he himself was brought under conviction, knowing that he probably wasn't living a good or moral life. I don't even know how to say that properly, except to say that I don't think he sat down and Jesus said to him, now, if you really want to be a Christian, you have to change what you do and you've got to change this. The change happened. And that close to the source, Christ, it seems simple to me that the change happened like that. He was brought under conviction. But change will happen. Don't go looking to make the change yourself. That becomes will worship and works of the flesh. But stick around long enough and keep trusting God, and you're going to find you probably will be doing or saying things that if you would say 20, 30, 40 years ago, not me, I wouldn't do that. And there are difficulties when I said yesterday, for example, about when people try to be benevolent. There's difficulties even in that. I don't think that it's this generation. It's existed, it's an age-old problem. We just don't read about it. The man who was sitting at the temple gate begging alms. Now, it'd probably be right to assume that somebody in the Bible begging alms was truly poor, truly destitute, truly needed whatever they were begging for. But we tend to think that in today's society, and it may be more prevalent in today's society, but that somehow we recently invented the beggar who really doesn't need the money. That's been going on since the beginning of time. Ours is not to judge or to decide. As I said yesterday, there's difficulty because many times I'm conflicted. I almost have to put a governor on myself because I want to help. And sometimes help comes at a cost. Sometimes you want to help somebody. I remember trying to help somebody and didn't realize that that person had mental health issues, and I nearly got a foot in the face because they didn't want my help. Everything comes you've got to use discernment. But we're not to decide, does that person really need my help if somebody's asking for help? And I think the best way to describe my definition, it's my opinion. I'm telling you what my opinion is. I always just make the distinction between opinion and what's in this book. My opinion is, if the individual truly that's begging or asking for help doesn't need it, and you help them, first of all, that's between me and God, what I do, and their dishonesty will be dealt with. It's the same thing that I tell you about giving when people say, well, I don't know if I should give my money. They talk about my money to certain ministries. Well, again, if you should have the misfortune of maybe not knowing where or what, I would simply say to you, if you're doing it with the right heart and the right mind, God's not going to look on your potential, we'll call it this, naivete, on what someone may or may not have been doing with what you presented to the Lord at that particular storehouse. That's not your trouble. Your trouble is being obedient to the Lord. Your issue, your thing is to be obedient to Him, and that's your issue. The Lord will deal with those other people. Just like, somebody said to me, well, why doesn't God just blot out those people that are charlatans? They're just religious charlatans. Why doesn't He blot them out? Well, why should He? Why should He? I mean, eventually He will. We know what the fate of the devil is. Eventually He will, but why should He? If you're not willing to do the work and check out what somebody's saying and verify what they're saying and what they're teaching you, if you're not willing to put in the work, it means you're lazy. And if you're that lazy towards the things of God, which is your eternal destiny, I probably can't help you. Because this is a thinking person's religion. This is not, I think I speak for many people when I say I've had enough exposure to people, pastors in particular, either being a guest in somebody's church where the people are either not being fed or they're spoken down to, they're talked down to. And I think that's the most unfortunate thing. We're supposed to be a family of God. And yes, God gave some prophets and pastoring teachers for the perfecting of the saints, but it's all the same flesh and blood. It's all sinning flesh. It all has the capacity to sin, to mess up. So let's not deceive ourselves either. It's always easy to pass the blame and say, well, I just didn't know. Well, it's your responsibility to know. And you may start off in a ministry that's not rightly dividing the Word of God. I have to choose my words wisely here. A couple of years back, I met an individual who was searching. And I distinctly remember had the misfortune of sitting down with this individual at the Ritz-Carlton in Marina del Rey for this person to pick up a book out of their book bag. And it happened to be, let me think of the title of this book. It happened, well, let me just show you what the title was. That was the title, okay? If you don't know what that means, don't worry about it, okay? But that was the title of the book. And I was asked, what do I think about that book? And I said, really? Well, if we have a shortage on toilet paper, count me in. Otherwise, I'm not going to waste my time because, first of all, that individual didn't even put a pen to paper or finger to keyboard. That's somebody else's writing. That's not even that individual. First of all, most of these ministers ghostwrite. They have a ghostwriter. They don't write their own books. We saw that firsthand with a certain individual who was just going to wholeheartedly plagiarize Dr. Scott some 20-some years ago. So what I have to say about this is just, you know, I feel that if you can't discern, it's because you're not putting in the work. Don't say, well, I don't have the gifts or I don't have the language. Just you start reading, and within probably a day's worth of reading, you're going to figure out real quickly that the individual that you may be listening to, if they're not giving you better understanding and clarity, you're not being fed. And sometimes being fed is simple repetition. Sometimes being fed is kind of what I do. I'll take a whole subject, and I'm famous for this. Lots of information, and I just dump it on you. Kind of like you've just been dumped on, and you got to sort it out. And I actually like that technique. Do you know why? Because each individual, when I bring a whole bunch of information, the kind of deep stuff, and I just dump it on you, each person will end up grabbing on to some one dimension, but not everybody grabs onto the same thing. And that's where development happens, because not everybody's at the same place. So you give people something to think about beyond just the standard repetition. So I think if you're not progressing, if you're not growing, if you're not developing your understanding of God's Word, you're probably not in the right place.